Hello. Hello. My name is Paul Bridgewater. I am I would like to say, universal artist living and working in New York. I'm doing this videotape with Anton Perich on the occasion of my birthday arty exhibition, which is to celebrate my 24th birthday and the showings of these new works for the first time in New York. It's very funny, actually, that I should say that I'm showing my new works, because the first thing I'm going to show you is actually a painting done about 11 years ago. It's actually the first painting I ever did, and it's a painting called Stigmata. Very interesting that the first thing one should ever do is abstract, because most people start from another position. Of course, I guess, well, when I was young, I had had a lot of dealings with schizophrenia and many problems dealing with the world and oneself, etc. Thusly, I had a very big problem dealing with human beings, dealt mostly in my mind. One day, I happened to look up, and in the corner, I saw a series of shadow patterns. Well, I decided that this was something I would really enjoy portraying. I decided, and I asked my mother to please provide me with some things to do paintings, for I really wanted to portray the scene that I had seen. Of course, being 13 years old, I wasn't very interested in paintings in grays and blacks, which of course are what the shadows were, but decided to go on to what were my favorite colors. I asked myself, in relation to this scene, what were my favorite colors? Of course, blue is my favorite color, so I did the painting Stigmata, which is basically in blues in that relationship. It's very interesting because actually one of my ancestors helped write the King James Version of the Bible. So I was very interested, of course, in biblical scenes and biblical images. And even dealing in abstraction, I seem to always relate it to a biblical image or a scene. Stigmatas, of course, are signs, which the very devout people, people who believe very strongly in the crucifixion, etc., would suffer. They would suddenly break out in sores and would show the sores of Christ, the signs of the crucifixion. Of course, realizing that I was going into this art scene and the many sacrifices that were involved, I realized that the taking of this position of becoming an artist was, in a sense, a stigmata. It was taking my artist's mark. Starting there, if one begins with an abstract image, one begins looking at the world from an abstract view, of course, you are able to see many things. Abstraction comes from architectural feature. It is present in everything in nature. Everywhere you look, there are geometric relationships. Thusly, I dealt with geometric relationships. And in my show, I've been showing a number of my new abstractions. This piece here is called There Are Many Golden Paths. This is something I believe in much. Everyone sees a different view. Everyone has a different vision. Thusly, there are many paths. Another painting of this period. It is called For the Love of the Gyroscope. Interesting, the gyroscope, of course, is a symbol of balance. The gyroscope always maintains balance. Something I believe very strongly in abstraction is that a piece should always balance. In abstraction, unlike realistic art, where you would possibly portray a man sitting in a chair. You turn this painting upside down, it does not work. A man in a chair upside down is not intellectually or conceptually necessarily something that works. In abstraction, you are dealing with geometrics, those things that occur in nature, in architecture, etc., that you see all around you, the shadows, the cracks in the floor, the corner, the patterns in the walls, etc. So, of course, an abstract painting should be able to hang any way. More or less kills the joke of the abstract painting that was hung upside down. Possibly in this, I believe very much in abstraction that there are natural balances. Thusly, in doing an abstract work, you find the balance points in nature. A piece should never really be considered upside down. Thusly, it can be hung anyway and always balanced. This painting is called Against the Looking Glass. It has this title, is to illustrate the fact that the image is as if against a glass which represents the duality of all things, a glass which somehow gives a twin image. But of course, it's exactly the reverse image. I believe very much that there are complete worlds in coexistence, but opposites of exactly what we see and what we do. Against the Looking Glass, the original for this piece, which is an abstract paint by number kit, illustrated here. By this and all of the things that come in the kit. Now I would like to show the canvas here. Now come back and show the kit. Now I'll read the instructions. This piece was completed April 15, 1978, and was conceived sometime in 1975. The instructions read, in front of you is the world's first abstract paint by number kit. It has been done in response to all of the people who still believe that abstraction is not a valid art form and is created by imbeciles less talented than their 7-year-old children. The purpose is to illustrate the many complexities of creating such work and also its many aspects conceptually and intellectually. The piece in its entirety is sculptural and need not be painted. The actual form on canvas is to illustrate the importance of balance and the duality of form. Instructions for sculpture. Stretch canvas. Place in close proximity the kit. In the kit are brushes I have made of my own hair. Each one is marked artist's hair brush. It is more or less a joke on the fact that everywhere you would go, you would see artist's hair brushes. But you would never really saw a brush made of artist's hair. The tubes I have prepared myself and filled with paint of my own mixture. Instructions for painting. Stretch canvas. Mix paint with turpentine to desired consistency. Remember that artists' hair brushes are made of hair even softer than sable bristles, and thusly the paint must be well thinned. If you keep the brushes in their sculptural form, if you prefer to keep them in their sculptural form, you may replace them with any fine brush in sizes of 1/2 to 1 inch widths. Start with paint number 1, the lightest color. Each area is color-coded and should be painted according to the numerical sequence. It is, of course, acceptable to change the color placement, order, and relationships. In one corner are my initials. Anyone doing the painting is asked to please fill in and place your own initials in the exact same position in the opposing corner. Once again, to maintain the symmetry of the piece, use one of the 4 contrasting colors of your own choice. Sign the canvas on the back and place the completion date there. There you have it, a great work of art that even your 7-year-old can do. And I ask you, please paint it perfectly. Starting from the abstract position, seeing the world from an abstract reference is, of course, quite different from the way most people begin. Most people see the world as they actually see it. Human beings in relationships with them are usually the things portrayed first, or objects that they see around them. Of course, I started from an abstract reference, so I had quite the opposite dilemma in going from abstract to more realistic work. Most people, as I say, portray the things around them, people you know, relatives, friends, etc., and struggle to free themselves of this realist image or vision and come into the abstract vision. Now I started quite the opposite. So moving from abstraction, I began to portray scenes once again from what I would refer to as the abstract world, things that one finds in nature or in more or less peculiar scenes around them, very much like children imagining faces in the shadows, in the cracks of the walls, etc. Now I'm starting to move out of abstraction with this painting. This painting is called Reclining Nude. It was actually first seen in the fold of a sheet. I had actually, at that time, no interest in portraying human beings. When I saw this vision, I said, you know, this is something very wonderful. It is geometric forms. All of the lines are extremely geometric. But of course, it is very closely related to a real being, a portrait of some character. You know, as one would see possibly anywhere, if you have that context. Then from Reclining Nude, I did a painting called The Beautiful Sleep, which is once again almost a painting of sculpture. They are sculptural forms found in nature. In this case, she is reposed on a sea of purple sleep, which is a very deep sleep. Coming further and further into the real world, as in this painting called Nude with Flying Saucers. It's actually quite an interesting painting in the fact that it is a painting of my cousin Gary. Gary, I used to stay with him in the summertime, and Gary would always do terrible things to me, terrible, would greet me on my holiday by setting off stink bombs upon my arrival. Terrible things of this sort. Well, one evening I actually saw him escape the house, leave the house very late at night, and he went to an orchard. They live in an orchard. And he found a place where they had bulldozed trees, where there was an empty spot of land, and began this ceremony. He removed his pajamas, his clothing, all of his earthly belongings. And then he started screaming to the sky in an inaudible language, and I discovered later that Gary thought he was from another planet. He'd been sent here to observe, and he had seen quite enough and wanted to go home. This seemed quite a wonderful image to me, the man escaping his own planet, removing himself from Earth, the idea of freedom from gravity, etc. So of course I painted nude with flying saucers. Further in this context, removing oneself from abstraction to a more realist view is a painting called Kabuki. This, of course, enjoying the formalized positions of the Kabuki dance, I decided to do a series of Kabuki paintings. This painting, in particular, is painted to be viewed two ways. This way, which is a more formalized position, or as so, in which the dancer is wildly turning. The Kabuki is madly dancing. Having established this bridge between abstraction and the real world, or more realist art, I of course became fascinated by the many interesting characters around me. When I decided to do these later paintings, I actually delving into the systems of representation. I had an art gallery in Washington, D.C., and we specialized in mediums development. Many, many, many very interesting people were constantly around. Becoming interested in the magnificent people, these very intense people, the next object of my vision and portrayal were these people. One of the first people I found extremely fascinating was this man, Anthony Muto. He's an American fashion designer, quite marvelous and quite an intense character. This painting, which is called The Laughing Man, is a portrait of him. He brings great joy into the lives of all the people he touches. From there, I come to this next painting, self-portrait with my head in the clouds, which is very interesting. I had awakened one morning and found the headlines discussing the invention of the neutron bomb. At that point, I thought how horrible that anyone could invent a bomb that only killed people and doesn't destroy property. It seemed quite the most horrid thing possible. I cried for about 16 hours, in which I could not walk, talk, or move. And I telephoned many, many people saying that they had to write letters, make telephone calls, etc., and do everything they could to make sure that this bomb was never produced. Someone said, if you think you can do anything to stop or delay the production of a bomb, you have your head in the clouds. Thusly, I painted this painting, self-portrait, with my head in the clouds, or with eyes on an uncertain future after the invention of the neutron bomb. This painting, which is called Lady of the Park, is a painting of Maud Muto. She is the daughter of Anthony Muto, who I've mentioned before, and she's quite a marvelous character, extremely lively. Although she's only 17 years old, she is, as I say, going on 36. She's quite a marvelously intense person. Of course, one's fascination leads one to very intense, interesting, and intelligent people. She, who is the daughter of a fashion designer, is always, of course, extremely in style, and stylish actually beyond the style and before the style. She and a girlfriend had dressed in these marvelous silk taffeta skirts with 7 colored petticoats and had gone skating in Rockefeller Center here in New York. This, of course, caused quite a sensation and was extremely inspirational. I portrayed her in front of the view from my old studio, which was at Central Park here in New York and 101st Street. Out the window was a beautiful lake, and it seemed perfectly fitting for the lady of the park. And she, what's very interesting, she'd been painted when she was very young, and she found that she didn't like the painting now because it portrayed her as a child. I decided to beat her at her own game and paint her as a grown woman. My interests, of course, in painting people, in portraying a person, is to remove all of the faddish characters or characters of age. My interest is to bring everything down to its most important lines. Remove as much as possible. Embellishment comes later, with coloration and stroke of hand in the painting, etc. So I brought it down to all of the basic elements of her features, all of those things that would always be seen. So whether she was 17 years old or 70 years old, the basic elements would exist. This is what I have portrayed in my painting, Lady of the Parks. This painting is a painting of the new composer, Robert Carpenter. Robert and I worked very closely composing new systems of musical notation. This painting is called Composer in A Major. The next painting, which is a painting of the jewelry designer Joseph Perich, who designs for Cartier, Neiman Marcus, etc., is called In This Bejeweled Existence. When I gave up my studio on Central Park West, I moved back to my apartment on 20th Street and 7th Avenue. This is when I began to do these interior views. Of course, being confined to 2 rooms, I, of course, had to basically find my inspiration within my 2 rooms, more or less redefining my space. From this, a friend one day said, well, you've been doing these abstractions, you've been doing these portraits, what about still lifes? Well, I'd never had this challenge before. Of course, all of my life, my mother had kept quite a magnificent garden, and I'd been extremely attached to flowers. So I said, no, I haven't done still lifes yet, but give me a week. Immediately, I began work on a painting of roses, living, in quite an extraordinary environment where one room is completely black, every element in it being black. I started doing these paintings called American Beauties. From American Beauties, I went on and did this whole series of still lives. This painting, Quiet Tigers, suggesting tigers in peace or tiger lilies. This piece, which is called Interior View, which is odd in its title, perhaps in the fact that it suggests with the window that possibly you should see some of the outside world. but it is really my own view, my friend's, my iris. So it is an interior view. I move on to something which I first thought of as post-prom. It's called a single orchid. The next of these works I've entitled A Little Bit of Paradise. They're birds of paradise, one of my favorite flowers. Once again, this is an interior view of my 2 rooms in Chelsea. This next work is a painting of daffodils called Eternal Spring. This painting is especially thrilling to me because I decided to beat the springtime, and it was done in the midst of winter, and it seemed very wonderful to enjoy the qualities of spring far before the actual happening. In the background here is a portrayal of a metal sculpture, which I have in my home, and I decided very much to remove the qualities of weight and mass. Thusly, this symbolizes the light refraction. I wanted to make the thing very mysterious and very light. I've removed the mass of this sculpture. This piece is called The Forest, and it's very interesting. When I had my gallery in Washington, I decided to take a sabbatical and actually rent an apartment in New York. So I took a studio for 6 months and started building sculpture. For New York, of course, was building. Everywhere you looked, they were building. So I started scrounging building materials. Pieces of stone, glass, steel, nails, wire, etc. And I was building. Then the Museum of Temporary Art in Washington called me and said, "We would like you to do a show here." So I said, "All right." In New York, I've been building. Now, how do I respond to Washington? Washington, of course, is paperwork. Also, you need 1,000 copies of everything. This meant drawings, which is paperwork or something of that sort, and copies, photocopy machines. So, of course, I invented this medium, which I call paper sculpture. Now, it started this piece, which is called The Forest. It's actually my 3rd piece with this, and it comes from different drawings. This is actually 15 individual drawings. This is a drawing of what I refer to as zebra iris. This is a drawing of grass. Now you take these original drawings and you photocopy them. This is done with savin paper, hundreds and hundreds of times per unit. So there are 15 components in this piece, and there are about 2,500 copies that go into this piece. You copy each of the individual components and then hand color them with a random coloration system which I've devised. Here on the floor is a fallen leaf pattern. On each sheet, there are about 20 different leaves. The coloration system works thusly. With 20 leaves, you would take 1 tone of a green, using all of the tones of green, blue-green, yellow-greens, gray-greens, etc. You would color with 1 tone 2 different leaves on a sheet containing 20 leaves. Remove that sheet, color 2 different leaves. Remove that sheet, color 2 different leaves. You continue until you have used all of the tones and all of the leaves have been colored. This continues throughout the piece, so that in the tiger lilies, you use many variations of blues and greens. In the wild roses, many variations of oranges and ambers and reds. Then, when you construct the piece, after you've colored it, you layer many, many pieces on the floor of the fallen leaf pattern, going up the walls, the grasses, imitating nature so as to layer each sheet after another as grasses would grow visually. Ferns are actually free so that they hang free of the wall. All of the pieces are done playing with gravity, playing with all of the aspects of nature, so that the leaves actually hang away from the trees, hang away from the ceiling. There are bits of sky and clouds wisping about, all of the aspects of nature that one can imitate. Now this piece, which as I say, consists of somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 individual sheets of paper, can be taken down. All of the components go in their individual envelopes and can be mailed anywhere with instructions. This piece will be featured in a new book by Patrick Firpo and Claudia Katayanagi, which is, Claudia, I think, has quite a marvelous name, which means in the form of the willow tree, which relates very much, I think, to my piece, and that's being published by Richard Merrick and Company. And it will be out in September. And thankfully, they're giving me the largest section of the book, since most copy art is one sheet. Most copy art is something that someone will take down and lay on the screen and produce actually one sheet artwork. Of course, I believe in taking it much further and producing many of the elements of nature, many, many elements working together, always at random, and always with all of the aspects that there can possibly be. Thank you very much for joining me at my exhibition. I've enjoyed showing it to you, and I will definitely see you again.